Hello, everyone.
It's so funny. I was saying to you, 5 years to the day, and I was here doing my new voices, and it was the most utterly nerve-wracking experience, as the new voices who were here will confirm. And I said, I'd never do it again. So obviously here we are. Do you want to get us going?
Okay, so I'm starting by showing this random slide that somehow captures the fact that once Olivia and I started talking, we realised there's so many connections and so many threads that led us to our collaboration of Little Lion Girl. And we are going to talk about that. But first, we're going to sort of talk about, all these connections that led us to that. The other thing is that we've been quite amazed at all the connections that all the speakers have had over the weekend. And you're going to see there's so many things that we say that relate to things that were mentioned throughout the weekend.
Yeah, we thought that we were coming up with something truly unique and original. And they stole all our material.
Yeah, basically.
Will we start with you?
We'll start with me. So we all know that inevitably we put a lot of ourselves into our books. So I'm starting with little Fiona and her brother. And when I was little, I was told off for staring a lot. I wasn't discreet. I've always been an observer. I like to just look and take it all in. And my mum used to tell me off. But now I'm a grown-up. I still do it, but a little bit more discreetly. And it's my superpower now. All the things I see are things I remember. And it doesn't matter what it is, it has potential to end up in a book. And it's all useful stuff. And also, well, there is a reason I've shown you this slide. You'll see later. But also, it's important to remember what would that little kid make of the books that I make now. And these are just a few, not necessarily like my all-time favourite books, but they're the books that I honestly remember as a kid. So there's books I remember being like tatty treasure of a Disney book that my dad would read every night because it was very easy to read because they were all little short stories. But books like What a Mess, I just remember thinking, God, that's a really good idea. The adults come into the room and see this mess and he thinks that's his name, What a Mess. And I just remember it was the idea that hooked me with that. But then absolute treasures like a pop-up Concertina Thumbelina book. And that's kind of, I didn't have a lot of books. Like a lot of people, the libraries were the best place for me. But this was a book I had as a gift and it was on display as a beautiful, beautiful object. It's that thing of a book as being a beautiful piece of art. And in that case, it was like 3D theatre sets that I just would gaze at. I don't know if I read it. I don't remember reading it. It was just the beautiful art.
It's nice to kind of get yourself immersed in the book through the art.
So the thing, as a kid, it was all about the pictures. It was all about looking. And I have to confess, I took a while to be interested in the words. I loved stories. So as a kid, I was the one picked out in the class to be in a special art club. 2 of us got picked to go to a special art club at lunchtime. And our pictures were exhibited in the library. Proudest day of my life there with my name underneath. It was like a haunted house with like a sort of gradiated background. Libraries have played a big part. But I was also picked to go to Rainbow Reading Club because I wasn't a quick reader. I caught up eventually, and that's why Adrian Mole's in there, because Sue Townsend is from Leicester, where I grew up. So that is one author visit I know I had. I think I had one author visit. We went to the Central Library and saw her speak, and that was quite inspirational. And also it was a book. I thought, I can be a reader. So I'm jumping fast forward to a book that I did called Look, that's a story written in 00 words. And it's an unusual book because it's a story of a day. And but it's unusual because the words are incorporated into the pictures. And so it wasn't until I finished it, I was like, aha, that's the book I needed when I was a kid, because I was the kid who wasn't looking at the words in the corner, I was poring over the pictures. And so not in every spread, but in a lot of the spreads, I'm sort of gently encouraging the kids to read. So that's been a gorgeous thing that's happened, because it's been a lot of kids' first books they've started to read, kind of by accident. So that's just the beginnings of me. And this is over to you, Olivia. What's going on here?
So this is my mom and me and my sister Fiona. And actually, that's a Disney book too.
Ah.
Yeah, funny that. So when I was little, we would have had books in the house. As children, the books in the house served a purpose. You know, they were there to educate you. My parents wouldn't have been well off, so we were reading ourselves. Or if there was books in the house, it was reading to kind of push you along to whatever you wanted to do next. But bedtime was a particular experience because my dad was very fond of reading long ballad poems, not necessarily suitable for children. So I don't know if anybody's heard of The Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert Service. It's the story of a guy in Yukon, and one of the prospectors has died and is frozen solid, and this character has to basically figure out how to cremate a frozen solid man. So my dad used to read me long ballad poetry in the hope that I might go to sleep, but there was fantastic words and rhythms in the poetry. And then my mom would read us bedtime stories, but she read us the original Grimm's fairy tales, which it's not Cinderella, it's Ashputtel, and Ashputtel's sisters slice off their toes to fit them into the glass slipper. But fortunately, my dad, still reading poetry to me, my dad did try and give us funny poems. So there was Shel Silverstein and Spike Milligan. So it was like, well, I know you've had something horrifying, but let's have something to laugh about as well. So I feel like I got the broad spectrum of stories that way. It was so interesting listening to David Allman talk about being Catholic, and my parents would be very Catholic still. So we had this children's Bible, and this is really interesting to me because I don't have this book, but I decided to have a look and see if it still, what were the interior shots and if they flagged anything. And, you know, growing up in 1970s and 1980s Ireland, the books you got they mightn't have been the stories that you needed to read. So we've got the issue that Jesus is among the teachers and is blonde-haired and blue-eyed. So you're not really getting a true representation, but also we have to hand it to the illustrator in the pictures of creation. Can you see what is in the top left corner? It's a pterodactyl. So obviously the illustrator is handing something there to help you look at it. The power of pictures, absolutely. So as I said, growing up, my parents wanted you to have books that educated you. So we had encyclopedias, and I love nonfiction. So we had Collier's Encyclopedia, but we also had the Collier's Children's Classics. Now, this I looked up. I have this series at home, and it was published in America in the 1960s. This series is incredible. It's actually got really diverse stories. It has folk tales from around the world. And there's a book there, book number 8 is Roads to Greatness. And this goes back to what Samira Ahmed said. It was biographies and partial autobiographies from famous people. So you had Mark Twain, but you also had people like Helen Keller, like reading her autobiography, Marie Curie, Anna Pavlova talking about trying to be a ballet dancer, and an amazing woman called Mary McLeod Bethune who basically started a private college for black women to be educated. So all of a sudden I was reading these books about fantastic women who lived in castles, who painted lions. And because my dad was like, you can do anything if you put your mind to it, I believed him. And that's dangerous. Because this happened. Anybody know who the man in the middle is? It's Johnny Logan. So because I genuinely believed if you put yourself out there, you could figure out how to do things, I sent a postcard off to RTE for a show called Action Station Saturday where you could try being something. And it was be a magician on RTE. Now you need to know I did not have a magic set. And you need to know that I sent off the postcard without telling my parents. And a letter came from RTE going, would you like to come up to Dublin? You'll be on Saturday morning and you need to do a magic trick. The slot will be about 3 minutes long. I was 11 in that picture. So my dad figured out there was a local magician, pushed me in the door and went, teach her 2 tricks. And you know what? I was a terrible magician on national TV. I was told to look at the camera and I stared. I did not look at my magic tricks at all. And in fact, I showed people how the tricks worked. I showed them the back of the box and I showed them the tissues. But what struck with me, I had such a wonderful time on the train going up with my mom. And I had a great time meeting Johnny Logan. So it didn't matter that everybody was going like there was a corpse child on TV doing magic tricks. It was more about the fact that I had a great time going to Dublin. So I was going to ask you, is this your first time in Dublin?
It's not. I came, so kind of continuing with my creative journey, it was just inevitable I'd end up pursuing art. And it's always that thing, like parents sort of steer you, like you don't want to be an artist, there's no money in that. You have to maybe do graphic design or so. Anyway, so that's what I ended up doing graphic communication at Glasgow School of Art. And I was lucky to do an exchange trip to Dublin. It was just for 2 weeks, and I stayed with a family and ran around doing drawings. So Olivia said, oh yeah, just shove those in. So just quickly, so the wonderful thing about the course was that it was very ideas-based. And I realised that that was the thing that hooked me. And that's still the thing, really, with books. Often it'll be kind of an idea. It might not necessarily be a character, or sometimes it is. But Kilmainham Jail cropped up this morning. Let's just move on. And that was just another one from the Dublin sketchbook. But so there was lots of drawing, lots of brilliant lectures and talks. And this is just sort of an overview of a kind of an impression of things that sort of had an impact on me. And I did my dissertation on Russian revolutionary things, but it's kind of that realizing I was on the right course because I discovered the power of communication. I wanted to communicate things. I didn't know what format necessarily, and I didn't want to be a sort of straight graphic designer, but I wanted to communicate with people. And we went on another amazing trip to the Outer Hebrides, to Uist. And this is a picture from a sketchbook, just looking at the sea. It was just so beautiful. I don't know if anyone's been there, but such gorgeous coloured turquoise sea. And so my first book project was an art book that really just captured the sort of atmosphere and feeling of the place. And it was just a repetition of that simple seascape with different colours, capturing a mood. And I never tire of that beautiful composition, and it crops up again and again in my work without me realising it. Sometimes it's quite obvious, like a book called A Dot in the Snow that's got that sort of strong horizontal composition. But all these, it's that thing that everything feeds into what you do. And that impacted a film. I fell in love with making my drawings move whilst I was at Glasgow. It wasn't really an animation course, so it was a bit of a gung-ho, oh, yeah, I'll just make a film without learning the basics of how you animate. But it was all quite over-ambitious and quite a lot of fun. And there was like a student competition. The brief was to teach people to learn a language. And I came up with this idea of a swimmer in a yellow cap. These are sort of storyboard images, and I did it on cell with sort of multiplane with oil paint and things. But it was kind of communicating that idea of a character being alienated and using distorted sound and shapes. And it was like it did flash into the European flag, and it was just my kind of bizarre Nostradamus prediction of Brexit. Yeah. Like a lot, it was quite a long time ago. But
were you hooked? Did you realise that animation was going to be your thing then?
I did. I was hooked, and I came out of college with a kind of knowing I wanted to work in animation. And this slide freaks me out a bit because it's sort of about 15 years or so condensed into one slide. So these are just projects that had a big impact on me. I was working in a very niche area of animation that was all sort of very illustrative and painterly and on paper. And I was lucky. It's that thing that everything in your sketchbook pays off in the end. Like I happened to have sketches of a college trip to Prague, and the images that you're seeing on the left side were from a film called The Queen's Monastery, which was a short film that I worked on for quite a few years and sort of served my apprenticeship. But it was a film inspired by music by Janacek, who's a Czech composer. And so my sketchbooks were like, you might come in handy doing the backgrounds. But there's just a few things that, and the sort of trees with the black with the blue, sort of middle-ish, that was the first time when I kind of had to respond to text. It was just creating illustrations for a book trailer for a lovely book called The Snow Child by Aileen Ivy. I don't know if any of you read it. It was beautiful. About 2012 it came out. But I had to respond to the text, not to illustrate the book, but to create some stills that were going to be animated for the trailer. And I got gorgeous feedback from the author, and I was like, oh, I like that. Mm-hmm. So these little seeds were happening along the way.
And then you get to work with two very recognizable figures.
Yes, normally with the kids, I'm like, does anyone recognise the character? But there's the Snowman and Snow Dog, which was so I did lots of commercials and short films and things. And that was the first time my parents were like, could properly tell people what I was working on because it was on Christmas Day or something. And so everyone that Christmas knew about it. So I was working the style of Raymond Briggs, and the other bottom middle one was Quentin Blake for a theatre production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So a lot of the time I was working in other people's styles, but my favourite jobs were like when I got to do the illustrations. So all the signs were there, and I was always sort of, it's that thing of continuing that interest in location drawings. And these were drawings of the London Eye being constructed, which is going to really show my age because it was a long time ago. And I sat there on the South Bank, intrigued by this thing that was appearing. And I had a ridiculously overambitious plan to do a film about it. And so this was something that we've discovered. It's that word failure that's going to crop up again, because there were a lot of failures in a way with animation, because it's quite a heartbreaking thing. You're always applying for funding, having ideas. And so quite a character building experience that has served me well for moving into picture books. So I felt like I got a few sort of failures under my belt.
You can't avoid it, really.
You can't avoid it.
Yeah.
But heartbreaking things that you do get over eventually.
Yeah.
But
so I want to talk about failure as an athlete, because I know you said that project never went as far as you wanted it to go. And I kind of got into hammer throwing the same reason I became a world-class magician. I was fast and I was strong. And it turned out that the university I was in, women didn't get to do hammer throw or pole vault or steeplechase. It wasn't in the 1996 Olympics, but they were considering letting women throw hammers, and they were considering letting women do the pole vault. So I was fast and strong. So I said, a bit like seeing how good a magician I could be, I wondered how good I could be as a hammer thrower. So I was kind of testing myself, trying to understand myself. And I won national titles, and I got to compete around the world. And this middle picture here is me at the opening ceremony of the European Championships in 1998 in Budapest. And there was a lot of spotlight because the women's pole vault and the women's hammer throw were going to be at that for the first time. So it was very exciting. So there's me and Nicola. We're still great pals, and we're going to be the first female hammer throwers, in this amazing competition. And before the competition, I've been throwing over 60 meters. I felt really, really confident. And on the day of the event itself, I had a proper foul where I stepped out of the circle. Never happened before. So I was like, okay, I've got 2 more throws. And both times I fouled again, and I had no mark. And I couldn't understand why that had happened. Now, at the time I was in London and I was studying sport science. I was really interested in sports psychology and understanding, what it meant to be an elite athlete. But I was also teaching in a primary school. So I was like, well, I failed monumentally, but what can I do about this? I'll really invest myself in sports science and sports psychology. And when I went to do the study, they were talking about something called VMBR, which is called Visio-Motor Behavioral Rehearsal, which is what elite athletes do to rehearse something without using equipment. So closing your eyes and imagining yourself throwing. And I was thinking, hang on a second. You're calling it visio-motor behavioral rehearsal. I do this with my kids in the classroom. When I'm teaching them how to swim, I go, okay, I want you to really imagine your hands are spoons and reach out and scoop the water. You're telling someone to imagine something. So instead of my focus being on elite performance, I wanted to learn how I could help children learn. And this VMBR was using your imagination. So all of a sudden, stories were coming into my lessons. I was using, we were going on a bear hunt when we were going around the gymnasium to help kids learn how to move more comfortably and understand themselves. And I realized I didn't want to teach kids to be elite athletes or sports people. I wanted kids who really understood themselves. They could swim, they could do rolling, they could do dance, they could do drama. So being able to make up stories in PE classes and swimming classes ended up being stories that I taught my own kids. So I started telling stories to my kids. So, and they've always known me making up stories to them. So my mom is a star because she reads me stories. And Charlie's, who's now not 7, but he's very accurate representation of me as a writer. So I started making up stories for them. And then I started, said I wanted to get a book. Like, libraries are great, so we used to go to the library a lot. So I wanted to get a certain type of book because we'd been in the garden and there was a robin and it was Christmas time. And I wanted a Christmas robin story. And there wasn't one in the library. So I kind of said, right, well, let's write it down. So I wrote it down, and it was incredible to me because the act of writing meant that every sentence had potential. There was a universe that could happen in these characters. And what happened is I started asking myself, like I did when I was trying to be a magician and a hammer thrower, like, whereas my magician skills were limited and I couldn't push myself any farther and I couldn't get any stronger as a hammer thrower, the thing about being a writer is that there is no end line. You know, your imagination is boundless. So I'm starting to explore that and starting to write that. And even when I talk to friends that I've worked with, this is my friend Natalie Smiley, and she kind of will give me a character and I'll respond to it, or I'll give her text and she'll respond to it. Like, this character here is inspired entirely by me. So you end up putting yourself into stories regardless. You might not mean to, but what you experience end up coming into your characters. So I know when I became a writer, but do you know when you decided you wanted to become a children's illustrator and writer yourself? Do you know when the turning point was?
It was a very, I think I'm quite an example. Well, I know a lot of authors are. I'm an example of it being quite a slow process. So I was having ideas for books like Look, the one I was talking about with the Zoom image earlier. I'd had that idea a long, long time ago. I'd been playing around with it. I knew it was a bit of it wasn't a conventional picture book, so I sort of parked it to one side. But so in between the animation, I was always working on my illustration that fed into this animation project sometimes, but I was building up a portfolio and collaborating with friends and being involved with exhibitions and producing cards and playing with materials and experimenting and just sort of playing is the word, doing a lot of playing. And this was just a self-initiated project.
But it looks like word and art, they're constantly moving together, aren't they?
Yeah. So I do have a thing for colour and pattern, and it was through doing these pieces that I kind of thought it'd be nice to think of a picture book based on a character exploring colour and pattern. And that's when I came, and this was a very quick process. I just had it in my head, right now, you know, like I think I'd been working on quite a well-paid animation project. I thought, I'm going to treat myself to just give this a go. It was it wasn't an accident. I sat down really trying to come up with a book idea, and I drew this image, which ended up being a book called Hiding Heidi. And she, in terms of character building, she arrived pretty fully formed. And this image was tweaked, but it ended up in the book, and it was on the cover in America and Turkey and a couple of places. We had a different cover here. And then I went to explore her more and think, what could her story be? And I wrote reams and reams of character things, a bit like Nathaniel asking questions, like thinking, well, what does she do? And that helped me come up with ideas for the story. And I quickly thought about other friends, and the image on the left was me kind of auditioning her gang of mates. It's like drawing lots of different characters and seeing who stands out and who'll make the cut.
And how do you decide who makes the cut?
Well, they just sort of, I did quite a lot of sketching, thinking about all the different things that they do. So I'm just showing a few drawings, but there were lots and lots of pencil drawings, thinking about all the different things that they get up to in the book. And yeah, they kind of, they shone out from the page, basically. But I won't talk too much about her, but she's brilliant at hiding. But she inevitably is so good that she misses out quite a lot of fun at her own party. And it's that thing of always enjoying the light and shade. And I remember hearing once that the perfect pop song has a mix of melancholy and euphoria, and thinking, like, I wonder if that's the same with picture books. Could that be the same formula? And it's just that thing of like, so that image of the stairs is the moment where there's a turning point for Heidi. She has a sit and a think, and after that she's liberated and ends up playing all the games her other mates like. And that's where this kind of give and take thing happens, and where the observant people in the audience might recognise the climbing frame. Yeah. So that's just my very sort of easy example of how it's always put in your personal stuff into the books. It's like, you know, why would I want to just sort of like Google climbing frame when I've got like a gorgeous memory I can just put in there? Yeah, it's that thing. We've all got our own unique take on anything that we're doing. And that's what publishers want. They want a unique take on everything. And so that's what, so these are the books I've ended up doing. The ones at the top row are the ones that I've written and illustrated. And having said what I said about putting in your own experiences and things, I really, really love the challenge of taking on someone else's text and being thrown in at the deep end and drawing things that I would never in a million years think of writing myself. So that's what happens when I take on texts, like The Lion Girl or drawing a snow dragon or frost goblin, things like that. It's just a case of like, I don't think I'd have ever thought of writing that. So it's just a really, really interesting challenge.
They are beautiful. Any favourite? Can you say, have your favourite?
Oh, don't ask me that.
Okay, you can tell me later.
Yeah. You know the rule about that. I can say ones that have got a special place. Like, obviously, nothing. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't pursued Hiding Heidi.
Yeah.
You know, that's what kicked it all off. So, yeah. But I'm going to ask you now. Now, this is where it links back nicely to things that have been cropping up over the weekend and the impact of nature.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
And the ridiculously stunning place where you grew up and still live.
Yeah, so there's a quote by John B. Keane, who's a very famous Kerry playwright, and he goes, "It's almost unbearable being a Kerry man because it's an awesome responsibility." And I kind of feel like that. And I know Mr. Hegarty isn't here to make comments about his football team, but we kind of know which team is really the best football team in Ireland. Yeah, so I'm very lucky to live in Killarney, and, you know, it's a place where, like, this is a view of the national park. Like, every morning I get to walk in the national park, and it's just lakes and mountains and it's green. And that sense of being from Kerry, like, even though I was an athlete, I would have been, it's an individual sport. So I kind of knew that there was a great thing about Kerry, that we were great as a team, as a football team, but also we had great individuals. And there was a writers' festival. When I was little, I know my dad, we drove to Listowel Writers' Week, which is a great writers' festival. And we went there purely so my dad could meet John B. Keane. But my dad used to tell us about the famous people from Kerry that were great writers and the stuff they had done. Like there's a guy called Maurice Walsh who wrote a short story that became The Quiet Man, and The Quiet Man is this great film. It has John Wayne in it. Kerry Man wrote a story that became a John Wayne film. Like when you're a small kid, everybody knew who John Wayne was. And then as I got older, like one of the most poignant, tender moments in Irish TV history was on this TV show called The Late Late Show. And a woman had just been rung up told that that they'd won a prize, and the person who'd won the prize had passed away that week, and it was live on national TV. And one of the people on the panel was a Kerry poet, and out of thin air he pulled out the poem and recited "Begin Again," and it showed how words could make a difference. So when you're growing up and you see Kerry writers doing big things, you kind of realize that local people can change the world with their words. So Kerry is trees and lakes and mountains, you know. So it did go into my stories. And one of my first book was actually inspired by that connection with nature. So these are the ancient forests in the national park in Killarney. And as if by magic, having never been to Killarney, my favourite spread for my first book was this scene, which is so similar. And this is from my first book, Be Wild Little One. It's illustrated by Daniel Ignace, and he had never been to Killarney, but this scene has the line that catches me every time I read it, because it's the message I always want to give to kids. And this story itself, it was a voice, like Nathaniel was talking, the voice of the story came through, and it's like, what can you give your kids? Magical, that's what you are. So if you teach children that they have this huge potential that they can respond to, it's a message that I want to share in the story. And what actually happened was the starting point for me was like this voice, which is totally different to Leonie. Leonie wasn't a voice. She was somebody in a place. But for this story, my sons were running down a grassy hill, and I wanted to capture that. How do you keep that forever so you can remind children that they can have those moments when they run down a grassy hill and feel great about themselves? So yeah, when it came to character, I didn't have to do as much with this. I had the voice of the story, but the character was down to Daniel. And interestingly, one of the ideas was, well, what will the character look like? How do you share a person or a child who's going to represent the idea of being wild and connecting with nature? And myself and Daniel had a chat about it. And Daniel said that, actually, I really imagine this child being like a young Kate Bush. And I was like, that's really weird. I imagine this being a young David Bowie. And when it came to discussing it with the editorial team, they went, we just want it to be a child. We're not being specific. And that works because it becomes a more universal message that you can give. So it was one child, one character. So that's easy, I would imagine. Does it get more complicated when you have more than one, I wonder?
I think it does. It does. From a visual compositional point of view, arranging everyone on the page, but then it gives you an opportunity to explore lots of interesting things with the dynamics that happen within relationships and friendships. And yeah, there's a lot of potential when you start playing with a few more characters. And I'm going to be very quick over Silver Linings because we've not got very long already. But Silver Linings we have to mention because that theme of character building, it's that thing. So this was inspired by that thing that two people can see things quite differently. And it's dealing with how you can't control when things go wrong. We all know that, but we can kind of control how we react to them. So subtly, that's what's going on here with Pip and Parker. And for the characters, well, this was a sketch from a long, long time ago from a memory. Sometimes I'll walk, nothing's wasted. This was just a memory from something, a rainy queue in Paris. And tourists in beautiful, transparent Macs overlapping. I was like, I'll draw that one day. Probably about 6 years later, I sat down and did this very quickly. And the colour palette and the fact it was raining kind of impacted an element of the story. And then I did lots and lots of sketches. Once I'd started to get the story, getting to know them, getting to know who Pip and Parker were, until I ended up with the final characters. But this is just a little bit touching on my process. So everything is created on paper, not as one perfect finished piece, but lots of different elements using oil pastels, and it was mentioned in the introduction about blow pens and rubber stamps. And so these are just some of the bits that went into that book. And it's that thing of things tying in again with animation, that thing of capturing movement and a moment and an emotion, but in a static image. But I like to think about the movement in a static frame. But this book, it kind of also plays with a refrain of the fact that you can tell they're best friends because sometimes they don't need to speak. They're that comfortable with each other. So there's occasional sort of wordless spreads throughout.
Which a child will read anyway. They'll read the pictures,
Yeah,
won't they?
this is it. We've talked about this together a lot, the power of communicating a lot in a still image. It's gorgeous when you're combining the words and the pictures, but sometimes it's interesting to play with just the pictures. So throughout, Pip, who's on the left, it's like Ant and Dec. I drew them always. At one point I realised I'm going to have to change it. Just nice that Pip's on the left, Parker's always on the right, like Ant and Dec, so you know who they are. Earlier on, their plans to play with their paper boats are ruined. And at the end, it's a huge spoiler, sorry. Parker always knows what to say, always, but he's only human. So this is the moment where their amazing drawings are ruined by spilt milk. But Pip has learned, and she quietly places her paper boat she'd had in her transparent coat pocket all this time, and places it on there and cheers him up. But so she's learnt from him. But we're here! Hooray!
Hooray! Do you know what? I know I talked about we didn't do much growing up and kind of loving Kerry and everything, but we had a really interesting chat. And one of the big adventures I had when I was little, we drove from Kerry to London to meet cousins. And we visited somewhere. And I discovered you visited somewhere.
Yes.
So we've got 2 lion girls in Trafalgar Square, which is really interesting because we got to recreate them almost, didn't we? Almost recreate the scene. Honest to goodness, that was incredible. Just to be able to be in that space, because the journey from Leonie going to the big city, it didn't start like that. You know, when it started as a story, what actually happened for me was I had the title. I have a blackboard at home, so words get written on the blackboard. And someone said, "Oh, that would make a really good story." And I was like, "Yeah, it would." And I had nothing. And then one day, if you can see in the picture here, it says, "The city roared like a jungle." That was the opening line. And in the box there it goes, I've written down, buses bleated, cars cawed, lorries fired. And I was like, yeah, why am I going on about the noise in the city? It's called Little Lion Girl. And then I realised I needed to add the line, Leonie roared at the city. And I knew I had it. That was the starting point there, because what actually happened was I had a moment. And I had this girl standing in the middle of a city roaring. And I'm like, why would a girl stand in a city and she's not scared? Why would a girl be like that? And what actually happened was, on the other page, there's a voice halfway down. It goes, "Hold my hand, Leonie. The city is wild, and you are only one little lion girl." And I go, I know why she's shouting and roaring and just brilliant and bold. It's because her mom's there. Like, why wouldn't you feel like you can do anything when you've got your parent or your grown-up with you? And I pitched the story to the editor on that line. And that line, as you can see, stayed in the book. Now, I knew the character after one sentence, but I'm really curious what it's like when you get a text and you have to get a feel of a character, and you know you have to draw someone who's representing something. How was that for you?
Yeah, well, Leonie skipped around in the back of my head for quite a few years. There was quite a build-up for me until just because of COVID and other books and things, she was just there. So it was quite a thing when I sat down to try and do her initially. So all the clues were there in the text. There's like a beautiful line about her curls bouncing in the sunshine. It's like, okay, we know that she's got this lion attribute with her amazing curly blonde mane. That became clear. But then, and as an illustrator, I always write a lot. I do a lot of brainstorming where I'm like writing the same words and underlining things. And it's all, again and again, it's like energy. So my challenge was to get energy into the way I drew her. So sometimes the character impacts on the way I create and the way I draw. So I knew I wanted that kind of energy of curly hair. So these are just various versions.
Lots of attitude.
Yeah, yes. Too old, too young, too this, like, and where does the lion thing come? And we ended up with a headband and taking her scarf off to create the tail. And there was discussions of a hat with ears.
But it's so much better, the hair.
Yeah.
The hair
It
is
had
more
to.
dynamic.
I never wanted it to have the hat, but sometimes publishers ask you to. You need to see it sometimes to realise that it's better to have them free and bouncing in the sunshine. Exactly. So, so yes, this is the fully transformed lion girl trying out her tail, and this is where things go full circle. I didn't animate it, but I worked with my brilliantly talented friend Mackie, who has often animated my characters, but she was desperate to animate this one, so we were very grateful.
Yeah, it turned out great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know the next character's sheet
Yes.
is really important.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was that sort of crucial moment where she's like,
she's observing, like you did.
She's observing. I do relate to Leonie on a lot of levels, actually, because as an adult, I'm ridiculously excited whenever I go anywhere, which is why I'm quite hyper excited to be here this weekend. And it was just a nice solution to use the kind of colour and pattern to inspire her that she wants to also be.
And children, when you show this page to children, they'll be looking at the people, and all of a sudden the child will go, oh, that's a giraffe. And like Fiona adds such beautiful details. Like if you look at the giraffe, they've even got really long eyelashes, just like a real giraffe.
Yeah,
it's just gorgeous touch.
But it's that thing of, I remember, this is just an abstract kind of colour plan that just made me, it's that thing of, I didn't really want to commit to exactly what Leonie would look like till I'd thought about the whole world she's in, because I had to make sure she'd stand out and be the most energetic sort of character that you look at on the page. And it was also one of the reasons I was so drawn to do the project, because I was interested in thinking about the city and how to, that is another sort of character in a sense, and everything that the city has to offer. And this is just an example of these were the roughs. I always print out the roughs tiny and sketch out the colour and think about the whole book in terms of how the colour can help tell the story. And another reason I was drawn to this is because it had that all-important light and shade and a little turning point and a chance for me to sort of explore the interesting emotions. And also I like to keep the sketches quite loose so that I can leave room for a bit of invention at the artwork stage. It's not just colouring in. It has to be a creative process where surprises and exciting things can happen. And
this is where we let grown-ups know things about the picture book that show how clever this book is, because it's inspired by extraordinary art and extraordinary artists.
I'm going to skirt to the next one just because of time, because that one's quite self-explanatory, but it's just thinking about the impact of a hot day. There were Lion Girl days this week in London where it's a treat, when it's a gift that it's sunny and hot, and it creates a kind of otherworldly atmosphere which I wanted to get in. But this is an important scene in the book.
Yeah, so going back to me with my encyclopedias, I mentioned a woman in a castle who painted lions. Not only did she paint lions, she lived outside Paris and had her own pet lions. There is a painting there on the far right by Rosa Bonheur, and I'd read about her, and I couldn't believe that a woman could live in Paris and do that. And, you know, children will appreciate and see these different lions and see different personalities, and as a grown-up to be able to recognize these are inspired by real art as well. Like, children deserve the highest form of color and pattern and representation of art, because children appreciate that, you know, they really do.
Yeah, yeah. And with some of the spreads, I sort of took a nod from real animal behaviour. There's lots of classic photos of cubs being nuzzled by their parents. And so I don't know if the reader sees it, but it just helps me make a decision. There's infinite ways of showing a spread where they're going for lunch. But that was through a discussion with our editor, Lara, who suggested, it's nice to show the bonding. So there was that with Leonie and her mother. So it was nice to sort of show that kind of pose, but also there's so many brilliant photos of lions hanging out in trees. And so it's like, wouldn't it be nice if they go up high? And it's like an interesting, exciting place to go for lunch. But that's just an example of how real animal behaviour helped me come up with a solution to show them going for lunch. So this is my messy studio, and just an example of how I have a lot of stuff and I use a lot of different materials, and that ends up getting scanned into the computer. And now the following image does show the complete spread of this, but just a little bit about my process. So it's a scene in a big square, and there's lots of people, and I did sketching in Waterloo Station, looking from above from a balcony, did really, really quite rubbishy, loose drawings of people just to get ideas of movements and the different characters, and then sort of cut little stencils and used children's blow pens to kind of develop the characters and composited them in Photoshop.
Do you know what I love about this? That little yellow girl, you can spot her in that crowd, and it reminds me of the yellow hat that you had earlier. Yeah. Threads and connections. Yeah. And there was something else. When we first met, we went for lunch, and Fiona went, and do you know that crowd scene? And I was like, yeah. She said, did you spot the mom by the fountain? And I was like, what mom by the fountain? She said, the mom taking a picture of her 3 boys. And Fiona knew I had 3 sons, and she'd put me and my 3 boys in the fountain. A bit like Chloe, but I'll start crying. But it was a top secret, and I didn't know when I was going to tell you, but that was quite a good. I caught you when you were a bit overtired. It'd been a long day. And there's someone else to spot that. But we'll see if you can spot. It's just fun to. There's this character from the train at the start. Yeah. Yeah. Very well cool. Done. You can see this. Good. Yeah. So we are pretty much out of time. That's okay. So we're ending with Leonie scampering across. But yeah, we are out of time. Shall I ask you that one last question? Well, you said to me that you thought, would I ever write a still character? Yeah, because I was outraged. I went, I can write still cam characters. Okay, Olivia, what's your next book? I had to think, and I went, no, that's not a still character. What's the book after that? No. So I think you might be on something. Yeah. That I don't sit still, but the characters don't either. Yeah. What are you doing next, actually, before we go? I've just finished a huge, overambitious book, which I've realised is combining all the things I was talking about. It's like an interactive poetry book for Walker Books at 64 pages. And I've just finished it, and it was quite big. But it's using my design brain and problem solving and having ideas. And I enjoyed it a lot, actually. So that's what's next. And I'm starting on my next author illustrator book. Okay, a Fiona. Any day now. Brilliant.
So, yes.
So thank you so much for
But
coming.
that's it.